Hey everybody, Ryan here at Etrailer. Today on our 2023 Kia Telluride, we're going to be showing you how to install the REDARC Liberty Trailer Brake Controller. We're going to be doing that in conjunction with the Etrailer.com Universal Brake Controller Install Kit. But before we get into all that, why don't we just take a minute, check this out, and make sure it's going to be right for you. Since these Tellurides are pretty capable SUVs, you got a lot of people out here pulling some fairly heavy trailers around. And if your trailer has brakes on it, you're going to need a way to activate or apply those brakes. And that's where the trailer brake controller is going to come into play. On these newer vehicles, not only SUVs, but trucks and things like that too, I'm a big fan of these REDARCs. So I tend to always kind of find myself recommending them. And really because it's a really clean look. All right, so essentially all you're going to be able to see is the control knob here, and it doesn't take up hardly any space at all and almost looks factory. And I say that because these newer cars, they got just so much stuff going on the dashboard with buttons and screens and stuff everywhere. It's getting more and more challenging to find a spot to mount the traditional type brake controller, the boxier ones that usually are located down here and bumping against your knee and everything else. So this one, hardly even noticeable, and it's going to perform and stop your trailer. This controller is going to be good for trailers that have either one or two axles, which is about perfect for the Kia. Probably not going to be pulling anything bigger than that. And it is a proportional type controller, so what that means is however hard you hit the brakes in the Kia, that's how hard the brakes are going to apply on the trailer. And that just makes for a smooth transition, a lot more predictable stop. So for example, if you're maybe coasting up to a stoplight and you're halfway on the brake, trailer's going to do the same thing. On the other hand, if you have to slam on the brakes, the trailer's going to match that pressure. So, you're kind of stopping as one whole cohesive unit. You can adjust the brake force, and that's what the knob, one of the things the knob can do. So you have 0 all the way to 10. 0 would be no brake force. So let's say maybe you got a trailer and it's unloaded. You probably don't need a whole lot of extra help, right? You can maybe get away with a 2 or a 3. And then you're loaded down and it's real heavy. You might crank it up to 7 or 8, something like that. That way, everything kind of just gets a little more aggressive and applies the brakes harder. And you can kind of fine tune that on the fly if you want. This is also going to have a manual override. And to apply that, you just simply push down on the button there. And what the manual override does is it sends power just to the trailer brake. So you would use that in the event of a sway situation. If it's windy or going a little too fast or something, the trailer starts getting away from you a little bit. You can kind of hit the manual override and feather that power up to help slow it down and get it back under control. Something I do want to mention for those of you that really aren't too crazy about having something permanently mounted in here, maybe let's say you don't tow that often, there's a really good solution for you to allow you to apply your trailer brakes, and that is the Kurt Echo. It's a wireless type brake controller that'll plug into the back of your vehicle 7-way, and then you can use an app to actually apply the brakes. So you can unplug that thing and take it with you or put it in a different vehicle or whatever, and they work out really well. So I just wanted to throw that out there if that's your situation. But other than that, at the end of the day, really nice brake controller. These things are really high quality. We've had a ton of luck with them, and they look awesome. So you really can't ask for too much more. In terms of the installation, it's lengthy for sure. You're routing a lot of wires and hooking up a lot of stuff. So take your time. Hopefully what we can show you today will help streamline it for you and get you going in the right direction. You will need an existing 4-way flat trailer wiring harness to kind of build off of. We use the Takancha Universal one. In our case, it worked out really well. And then, of course, the brake controller install kit and the actual brake controller. So, as long as you take your time, you should be in pretty good shape. But with that said, let's get into it. To begin our installation, we're going to be here at the back of our Kia. And first thing we need to do is mount up our connector plug here. So I've taken the included bracket as well as a long bracket that I picked up separately and got that secured. And then what I like to do before we mount it is actually kind of start to prep the connector. Just makes it a little bit easier to do outside of the vehicle as opposed to underneath. First thing I'm going to do, this 4-way connector end, I'm going to cut this cap off because this is going to plug into our existing 4-way wiring. And then you're going to have an individual yellow wire. I just tape that up because this is for our reverse light circuit and we're not going to be using that. And then I like to change out the butt connectors. So this comes included with these pre-attached ones already, and these will work fine. I like to upgrade to these heat shrink style ones because the ends will seal up and just provides a little more protection against corrosion. So I'll strip our wire back, put on the connector, and crimp it down. We'll feed all of our wires through our bracket, line that up, and what you're going to do is take a screw, put that through, and then on the back side of it, take a flat washer, a split lock washer, and a hex nut. I'll do that for our 3 remaining corners. Underneath of our vehicle, we're going to take our existing 4-pole wiring. We're using the Takancha kit. This will work out real well for what we're doing here today. I'm going to cut that cap off. And then I'm going to take some dielectric grease, put it on our 4-pole here. And this just helps against corrosion. We'll go ahead and simply just plug that right into our existing 4-pole. So I made this connection somewhat permanent. I taped it up and then ran a zip tie around it to prevent these from coming apart. And then I made some other connections. So the kit's going to come with the big roll of duplex wiring, and if you carefully strip that gray sheathing back, it'll expose 2 wires, a black one and a white one. And the black one will be for our 12-volt power. So that just gets butt connected to the black wire coming out of our 7-way. The white wire from our duplex wiring will be for our electric brake signal. So that gets butt connected to the blue wire coming out of our 7-way. And I noticed the white wire is a ground. It's coming out of the 7-way. That'll have a pre-attached ring terminal on it. But given the space that we have to work with here, it wasn't quite long enough, at least to ground it in a spot that we prefer. So what I did was take maybe 1.5 feet of white wire, butt connected it, crimped on a ring terminal. We'll ground this in a minute, but first, since we have these heat shrinks, I'll come in with my heat gun here and seal up the ends. So I went ahead and kind of used some electrical tape on all our connections and zip tied it all up. And the duplex wire, as well as our ground wire that we extended, runs up through here. The ground wire, I use the provided self-tapping screw and attach it to this piece of the frame here. When you use a ground or attach a ground wire, you want it to be touching clean, solid metal. So this is a real good spot here. But with that said, our duplex wiring, we can now start to route towards the front of the vehicle, and that's because it's going to go up into the engine compartment. So it'll flow up through here and above our subframe. The wire is going to continue to run towards the front. When you're routing your wiring, be sure to do your best to avoid any hot or moving parts. But with that said, it's going to continue along. And there is, in our case, a plastic shield here. There's a couple 10mm head bolts you can pull out, kind of drop it down, give you more room. But essentially our wiring is just going to follow our brake lines here. So you can secure it every now and again with a zip tie. And then it's going to go right up into the engine compartment. Up in the engine compartment, this is where our wiring came up. And right here, what I did was I completely removed the rest of our gray sheathing. So I got that completely out of the way. The white wire, that's going to run inside of our vehicle down on the driver floorboard. We'll get to that in a minute. What we'll focus on first is the black wire coming from our duplex wiring, which that's going to run over here. where we have our breakers mounted up. So there's a 40 amp breaker, which is this one. And then in our case, we have a 20 amp breaker. That'll be the case for most of you out there as well. See your brake controller instructions, see what they recommend. A lot of times it'll be 20. So 40 amp, 20 amp. The black wire that's coming from our 7-way, from our duplex wiring, that's going to get connected to the silver post on our 40 amp breaker. All right, so you'll cut that wire to length, crimp on a small ring terminal, slide it over the post, and tighten the nut down. Use a 3/8 socket. You don't have to crank down on these. Get them snug, and that will be sufficient. From there, on our 40 amp breaker, as well as our 20 amp breaker, you're going to take some black wire, small ring terminals on the gold posts. Those are going to run to our positive battery terminal. All right, so I got them routed over here and crimped on some ring terminals. We're not going to hook them up to power just yet until we have our brake controller and everything else hooked up, but at least they're ready to go. And then that leaves us with one more post on our circuit breakers. All right, so that'll be the silver post on our 20 amp. You're going to take black wire, or you can use, you know, if the white wire is super long inside the cab, you can cut that to length, kind of up to you. But regardless, ours is black here. That'll go from the silver post on our 20 amp and run back. And that's actually going to run inside the vehicle along with our white wire down to the driver's side floorboard. So I did have to create a hole to get these wires through there. It's a lot easier seen from inside. So why don't we go ahead, move in there and check it out. Here inside the vehicle, we're underneath the driver's side dash. And here's the hole that I created to get our wires to pass through. So just make sure whenever you drill, you're not going to drill into anything, and I suggest using a little snap bushing like I did to put in there. That way the metal doesn't scrape against the wires and damage it. As far as the brake controller install kit goes, that's really going to about do it, with the exception of hooking up to the positive battery. For our REDARC brake controller, and this is going to hold true for just about all the brake controllers out there, you need to hook up our adapter plug here. So the black wire is going to be for our 12-volt power. So that's going to get connected to the black wire on our brake controller install kit. So we'll get that crimped down. And then the white wire from our brake controller install kit, that's going to be our electric brake output. So that's going to get connected to the blue wire from our brake controller adapter plug there. So moving on, the white wire coming out of our adapter plug, that's going to be the ground wire. So I just crimped on a ring terminal. And then our unit here, I actually attach that to a bracket that I made. That way we can kind of secure it up there. You really don't have to do this. I did so we could kind of see what we're doing a little bit better, really. You can mount this up in any orientation as long as it's secured. You don't want to zip tie it to stuff that's going to bounce around or anything. So, but with that said, one end is going to have an Ethernet type connection cable. So I'm going to plug one of those ends in. I feel like the one straight up and down will work better in our scenario as opposed to the one with the 90. But you can always switch them around if you want. And then this side we'll plug into here, and right up here in this area is where I'm going to mount this up. So I'm going to get that done, and while I'm up there, there's a bolt that I'm going to use to attach our ground wire. So I'll have that done, and then we can show you what it looks like after that is complete. I got everything mounted up, and I just utilized the bolt on the firewall there to actually mount up our bracket to it. And then as far as the ground wire is concerned, there's another factory bolt that you can pull out using a 12 millimeter, put the bolt through the ring terminal, and simply tighten it back down. There's going to be one more wire coming out of our brake controller adapter. and it's going to be the red wire, and that's going to need to get connected to a brake light signal. So that can be achieved by tapping into our stoplight switch. What you're looking for whenever you push a brake pedal down is you want the wire to have power. So I'm going to demonstrate how we actually did that up here with just some loose wires, because it's buried up there. It's really tricky to see. So in our case, our stoplight switch wire that we're using is green, almost the same color as this, but it'll have a black stripe on it. All right, and so what you're gonna do is cut that wire in half, okay? And then strip the ends back. And then what I did was took another piece of wire, maybe about this long, to make an extension. That way it makes it a lot easier to hook up. You only have to get way under the dash once. But to kind of use that extension, you can twist both them wires together real good, and then put a butt connector over it and crimp it down. And then crimp the other side down. That'll complete the factory brake light switch circuit. And now we have a wire coming out of it that we can tie into our REDARC brake controller. So again, this is just demonstration. We'll actually show you what it looks like underneath the car and hopefully give you a better idea. Like I said, it's buried way up there, so we're gonna do our best here. So here's the factory brake light switch plug, and this is how we tied our red wire from our REDARC into it. Now, obviously this is unplugged, but once you get it unplugged, it does give you a little more room to work, so I figured it'd be beneficial to actually see that type of connector and what we did. With that said, once you have it hooked up and the wire's tied in, you do need to plug it back in, and this particular connector is going to be plugged into a switch at the top of your brake pedal arm. At this point, you can come to your fuse panel door and just pop that off, and this is where we're going to mount our knob, our control knob. So you want to take, if you remember, on the top of our brake controller unit, we plugged in that Ethernet cable, or Ethernet looking cable, and I just push that out through this opening here. We'll just let that hang for now, and we can get this ready and begin to get our switch in place. On our panel, put some tape so we could draw on it, and I took the this little guy here. You can use as a template. You want this piece there to face in the 12 o'clock position, so that's what we're working with here. The larger hole, I'm going to use a 3/8 drill bit to open it up. For the smaller hole, we're going to use an 1/8 inch size drill bit. So you have both the holes drilled out. You can take that ring, and one side will have a piece that kind of sticks out. You want to put that down into it like that. And then you want to take your knob and turn it all the way, it'd be counterclockwise. All right, and then this is going to go through like that. Then you can take the nut and get that started. I have a 12 millimeter here. You can just barely snug this up. You don't need to crank on it by any means. We'll reassure ourselves that that knob is indeed completely counterclockwise. Then you can take this part, take the 0 and face it up towards that piece that's pointing out. Just snap that into place. We're ready to reinstall this now, so we'll come back to our cable here. That'll simply just plug right in. We'll just push this back into position. Back under the hood, we hooked up our power cables. So this nut is a 10 millimeter. You can back that off, get the terminal slid under there and tighten it back down. Not really much to it. On the cover here, I did cut out a portion of it. That way you could completely close it and lock it down. And now all that's left to do is test everything out to make sure it's working properly. Since everything's hooked up, I'm using a test box to check everything. Probably not going to have one of these at home, so you can always plug into your trailer, but keep in mind if your trailer has any issues, it might mislead you into thinking it's something you did on the vehicle side. But we'll try all of our signals. There's left, right, our tail lights, our brake lights. That top right corner, we have our 12-volt power. And then if I either hit the brake or the manual override on our brake controller, you can see we're getting brake output back as well. So whenever you have this hooked up, you'll notice right off the bat that we'll have a light that goes from green to blue. And what that just means is this needs to be calibrated. There's really nothing special to it. You can drive around normal, not hooked up to a trailer or with the trailer. Doesn't really matter. And just get up to speed and hit the brakes like you normally would. And after a few times of doing that, sometimes it works really fast. Other times, you might have to hit the brakes 20 times or something. This will eventually turn to a solid color. And once it does that, it's calibrated and you're good to go. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the REDARC Liberty Trailer Brake Controller on our 2023 Kia Telluride.